It's a phrase that, across our culture, seems to have reached almost axiomatic status.
Honey, you look better than money in the bank.
I got money in the bank. Yeah. Shout out what you drink. I got money in the bank.
John Cena wins money in the bank.
It's tough to pinpoint when the phrase first emerged, though some sources point to the 1930s. And that makes sense, because it was at that time that central banksters were doubling down efforts to retain credibility in their institutions. It was the era of the Great Depression.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Almost half of all financial institutions in the United States collapsed, and along with them, the savings of millions of individuals. Despite their having put the money they earned in the bank, it wasn't there. Maybe the phrase money in the bank can be linked to FDR, a PR push of sorts. 36 hours after taking the presidential oath, he issued Proclamation 2039, which suspended all banking transactions. A few days later, in his first fireside chat, he stated,
"I can assure you, my friends, that it is safer to keep your money in a reopened bank than it is to keep it under the mattress."
Money in the bank. But is that true? I mean, after all, here we are, 90 years later, and the wildly popular card game Cover Your Assets includes cash under the mattress as a mechanism to protect your financial wealth. Jokes, and the almost total depreciation of the Federal Reserve note since its creation aside, questions about bank solvency isn't just a historical footnote. Since 2000, there have been over 500 bank failures, including the collapse of First Republic Bank a few months ago, which, based on assets, was the second largest bank to fail in U.S. history, and the collapse of Washington Mutual in 2008, which was the largest bank to collapse in U.S. history. And there are hundreds of insolvent banks.
At the end of the third quarter last year, there were 722 banks that were bankrupt, with losses exceeding 50% of their capital. And the situation has only gotten worse.
That data, by the way, was in a report from the Federal Reserve, the same Fed that for almost a decade was headed by Ben Bernanke, who in a 2002 speech acknowledged that, and apologized for, the Fed causing the Great Depression. So maybe the meaning of the phrase, money in the bank, is a bit off. After all, in the United States, the banking system operates via fractional reserve. That means only a fraction of all deposits are actually kept on hand.
What do you mean the bank is out of money? Insolvent? You only have enough cash for the next 3 customers!
But that's not exactly the case, because in March of 2020, the Fed said that commercial banks were required to keep 0 deposits. Since even the most brilliant mathematician cannot create a fraction of 0, perhaps it's time for a neologism, a new word or expression. Isn't it more accurate to call the legacy banking system a zero reserve system? So what's to be done? Should we clamor for reform? Should we aim to end the Fed? Or should we, as individuals, each pivot and utilize alternatives to the failed Federal Reserve note scheme? Since 2009, when decentralized blockchain-based money emerged,
Satoshi Nakamoto, a real-life superhero.
I suppose you could say that the phrase, money in the bank, took on a new meaning, one tied to another phrase, be your own bank.
You can be your own bank.
You see, if you own decentralized crypto, you have your private keys.
The only way to move funds out of this address, that is the only way to spend from it, is to know the private key.
Who controls the keys?
You should be the only one who has your private keys.
If you rely on a third party to keep your crypto, like a centralized exchange, they have your private keys. You may be prevented from accessing what you believe is yours, whether due to an exit scam, hack, collusion with government regimes, or any other reason. So enter the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto.
There's a saying in crypto that says, not your keys, not your coins.
Not your keys, not your crypto. This phrase is literally saying that if you don't personally have the private keys to access your cryptocurrency, then it isn't really yours anyway.
We could go on at length about wallets and storage options and the like, but that's beyond the scope of this video. Perhaps the key takeaway is this. We live in a time where we have the technological means to circumvent the legacy power structures, including money. We don't need to use a particular currency because of where we happen to be born. We have options. We can choose that which speaks to us, one that isn't constrained by banker hours and rife with fees and surveillance, but always fast, seamless, inexpensive, and offers privacy. As former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker admitted to, the banking system ultimately relies on you having confidence in it.
People have confidence in something that doesn't cost much to manufacture, namely a piece of paper with some printing on it. And so long as people have confidence in that piece of paper, that it's going to maintain its value, and it maintains its value because people are willing to accept it, It's all a kind of, not a con game, but it's a confidence game.
Have they shown that they deserve your confidence?
We are at the tipping point where things can actually tip in favor of the many, of our favor, from the small group of people who have been benefiting from a rigged system for nearly a century.
One mind, one person, one technological breakthrough at a time. We are together building a new paradigm.
Well, hello and howdy, everyone. Welcome to Incubator Weekly. How's it going, fellas?
Going good.
Yep, loving those intros, Pete. Thank you for doing those. Those pump me up every week.
Me as well.
Unless
well,
you did.
Ryan and I
don't know. Maybe you put it together this week.
No, no. You were right on key there. And we're hoping to keep the good vibes going with something that's a little irregular this week, which is that, yes, while our guest is currently working on an incubator project, Anthony, hi, working on a topic we covered, I think it was 3 weeks ago now, web integrations, web framework integrations. Mm-hmm. What we wanted to talk to him about more so today was his usage of AI to generate Dash code. Now that sounds a little crazy to me. Ryan, is there anything you can start us off with about why we want to talk to Anthony about this?
Sure. And I think most, like 99% of the code that he's working on in this particular project is probably generating more or less boilerplate code for the
everything around the Dash stuff. Yeah.
But nonetheless, that is the majority of pretty much every application and every DApp, as they're called. They're mostly just traditional apps that call into a few functions from cryptocurrencies. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Personally, I have not really got into the whole AI thing. I'm going to ask Anthony some questions about that, but that's why we have him on, because as far as I can see, I follow a lot of people in the Web 2 space and a lot of people in the Web 3 space. And there are various opinions about ChatGPT and AI and everything. And Anthony is probably one of the leading voices that has a very good stance on this. Like, it's very balanced, reasonable stance. And I think we'll get into why that is in the show, but that's why he's here.
Well, Anthony, what is your balanced, reasonable stance in general?
Well, I mean, I see myself kind of as like a fanatic with ChatGPT at this point. I can still talk about the downsides, but I believe very strongly that everyone should be using it for all sorts of things if they haven't started doing it yet. And then you just need to be aware of like what are its limitations, what are its downsides. But once you know that, like what it can do for you, what it can't do for you, the things it can do for you is like so incredible. And I've been following AI for a while. I was actually first learned to code because I wanted to do like deep learning stuff like years and years and years ago, and never really got into it because I ended up learning web dev instead. But now that this whole thing is kind of swung back around, there's just really nice APIs where you can hook up like JavaScript code to OpenAI's AI API if you want. But honestly, anyone can use this thing because the chat interface itself is like the entire thing. It's a thing that can actually understand your language the way like futuristic robots in sci-fi movies do. In every sci-fi movie, they talk to the computer. They don't type on their computer. They talk to HAL. They talk to, the Lost in Space robot. So I think that's pretty cool that we now have that ability with computers. And I find some devs are like, they're correct to be skeptical of AI, but I feel like they kind of go too far into they emphasize the problems, then they just like don't use it at all. And it's like, well, the problems are limitations. Like the things it can do for you, I almost guarantee will save you time just because it can do so many small kind of little tasks. But I'll be curious, what are the stuff that you two have you ever used ChatGPT? What have you done with it? Like, what was the first question you asked it?
Yeah, I actually have a question right away. You said everybody can use it. And this is one of my first experiences with ChatGPT was that I feel like I can't use it. And the reason for that isn't because I'm not technically able to, because it's very easy to use. But why I say that is when I first got on there, and the first thing I encountered was I have to sign up. I hate that experience. I hate.
You're not going to get away from that at this point.
I hate signing up for services. I want to just pay for services and not be a user on their system. I want them to be a user on my system. In other words, I want to be able to control my own identity and not be a user in Microsoft's database with all of my queries cataloged and tagged as this guy is a dangerous wrong thinker, to use AJ's term. I know, like personally, I'm not as concerned about that as most people might. Most people in cryptocurrency remain anonymous, and I am not. So I generally am okay with the fact that, I have bad ideas, like wrong ideas that are dangerous to the system, and I'm fine with putting my name to that. But I don't want that experience to be for everybody in the world, that if you want to use this wonderful tool, you have to sign in and be categorized as whatever you're going to be categorized by Microsoft. Tell me about that.
I don't think so. This is so obviously we're in the Web3 world, so we're kind of privileged that we can say we have systems that don't do this, but every other piece of software does what you're doing. And the social networks themselves are able to categorize what you click, who you interact with, to an extent that you can't extract that kind of stuff from like really long conversations you have with an AI bot. And like I've had every wrong idea you could possibly think. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT directly. So if controversial ideas are gonna get you canceled, then I'll be the first one. So I wouldn't really worry about that. The thing about having to have an account and sign up and pay, it's always gonna be a trade-off. Like, do you want to be able to run things yourself? Do you want to have a pay-for-use model, or do you want a subscription service? They let you pay to use it, but it's a monthly subscription. And the reason why it's worth it is because they have invented a core piece of new technology that you can't really use anywhere else. You can use other language models, but they're not as good. And that's because it's integrated with Azure Cloud, and there's a very tight moderation kind of model around it. Moderation is not the right term. There's triggers on it to let them know when it starts producing content that they don't want for lots of reasons. And they're pretty good about like not censoring political ideas and stuff. They're trying to like make sure you can't build a bomb with ChatGPT. Like I think they've actually prioritized stuff like that pretty well. And yeah, it like saves your chat. You can purge your data if you want.
How are we in the open source ChatGPT alternatives? Like, is open source going to win this battle, and we'll be able to use ChatGPT, or not ChatGPT, but AI in general, with open source software and without accounts?
So no matter what.
Oh, yeah. For anybody who actually hasn't seen this tool at work, I wonder if we could show Anthony's short demo clip and then continue our conversation so that there is a visual behind.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, let's take a little look at this.
Okay, let's just do this. Oh, they are supported in TypeScript. Interesting. Oh, God, I already hate this. Yeah, no. Goodbye. Okay.
So that was, I guess maybe that clip didn't include the part where you initially asked it a question. Did that come before, Anthony?
So what I did is I gave it my code, and the bug that my code was outputting, and I said, how do I fix this bug in my code?
And then it gave you like those 1, 2, 3. Were they options or were they steps? Like first do 1, then do 2, then do 3?
I think it was probably gonna do both. It would, usually it gives you a couple different things to do, and sometimes it may be a couple steps. So it was basically telling me to install like the Babel TypeScript dependency and then configure TypeScript with Babel so that I could use decorators, which are only a stage 2 JavaScript language feature. So that's what was happening in that video.
I just wanted to clarify one thing real quick. That clip was from a video that was on the Incubator's channel last week. So if you're curious to see more of that, just look at Anthony's video from last week where he's actually working on that. And his voice that you were hearing was not today, Anthony. That was the video's Anthony. So yeah, just so everybody knows where we are with that.
Yeah, on Dash Incubator's homepage of YouTube, there is a playlist that's called Anthony Campolo's Live Dash Coding, and that's where you can find that video. So I will answer the question that you posed to Ryan and me before, Anthony, about each of our initial interactions with this tool, and then that'll lead us back to where we were before we watched the clip. So like Ryan, when I first went to try out this ChatGPT, I too was put off by, I want to say it actually asked me for my phone number.
Yes, it did. That's where I drew the line. Like,
you don't need to give it your phone number. You need to give it an email, though, I think.
Yeah, we need a service around this, Anthony, for Dash.
Whatever it was, I felt that it was asking for maybe even more information than I've been asked for at a bar or something. Like, you're not asking me for my phone number. You give me your phone number, that kind of thing. But then I broke down a few days later after I was looking through some of your videos, Anthony, and I thought, I'll just give it my phone number. I just really want to try it. Especially since you said the 4 version is, and others have said the 4 version is so superior to the 3.5 version. I thought, okay, I really want to give this a go. And so I went back to give it another go. And it was that time that I read the bit about like, we're getting better and better at withholding information we don't want you to have. And I was like,
what?
However they phrase it, like 83% better at not returning disallowed information or disallowed topics, whatever. So all that is to say, it brings us back to what we were talking about before the clip, which is, okay, so even though this comes from a company called OpenAI, it's not actually open source, right? Otherwise, there would be like many different versions of this.
The history of OpenAI is pretty complicated. They originally were open sourcing their stuff and writing papers, and they still write papers and they still open source some of their stuff. And then they have some products that they just keep under their own kind of basically APIs. Because like I said, like, if you don't actually stop this model from doing certain things, it will be able to do things all 3 of us can agree we don't want it to do. Like, I feel pretty confident about that. So, or just like, not necessarily that we don't want to, but that we would feel reasonable as someone running a company that we would not want the liability of building a tool that would do this. That's the way I think it's really worth thinking about why what they're doing is not censorship based, actually, is like, and not even cover your ass thing. It's just like, they started the company for AI safety concerns in the first place, and the term meant different things back then. So I don't know. I've been following this company for a long time, and I feel like they're actually, of all the tech companies out there, they have better ethics than a lot of them. And there's just certain things that, because it's such a unique technology, they want to have a gated API so that they can work with it. And plenty of companies work that way. I think there's always going to be a mix of like totally open source Web3 stuff and proprietary things that people want to lock down. I think those things can coexist with each other. They're giving you something preferably so valuable that you are going to want those trade-offs.
I just want to clarify something before we move on to make sure I understand. When you say, Anthony, I think we can all agree that there are some things that none of us would want this tool to do. Can the tool actually do anything other than simply return information? Like, could I tell the tool, like, hey, ChatGPT-4, take out the power grid of Shanghai? Like, can it actually do things, or can it just return information?
Yeah, so what I was referring to is like the kind of example I use, like returning how to like mix chemicals to make a bomb or things like that. And in terms of actually taking actions in the world, you can hook these things up to things that do things in the real world. By itself right now, it's just a chat interface. it's not able to actually do things. Just this idea of kind of turning models into agents where then they can kind of go off into the world and do stuff. Those things kind of freak me out, honestly. I think if I was concerned about anything AI-based, I would be concerned about the work around agents right now, and that most people aren't really talking about why it's more dangerous than all this other stuff we're building right now. So yeah, that's kind of a weird thing, but ChatGPT does not do that.
Can you give us a brief summary of what you've done for Dash specifically with this tool in your last couple streams?
Yeah, actually, what I should do is I should get that thing up so I can just show exactly what I did. Just give me.
Yeah, and while you're getting that up, I'll do my best job of explaining what you did. Like AJ, one of the things that I like most about you as a developer is that you are very you take good care to document your work, and so I think that's probably what you're bringing up. But
I'm going to show the ChatGPT interaction itself and scroll through what's happening here.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I am sharing. Great. Probably not going to have any of those.
So this is a conversation that spans the whole of your work with Dash. And
so what happened here is that I started by, we also go to the example. So I started by building a React component that was just fetching some kind of like Dash data. And so this was a React component that I wrote, and I knew that I was going to be wanting to build this in a whole bunch of other frameworks. So the first thing I did is I said, take this React component and implement the identical functionality with a Vue component. So this is what's called a prompt right here. You give it a prompt that basically kind of sets it up to do something, and then you feed it data after the prompt. So after you give it the prompt, then you give it the code, and it will hopefully take that code and do exactly what you told it to do with it. So does that make sense so far?
Yep.
And can we get any closer on your screen here, Anthony?
There we go.
Thank you.
And yeah, and then for this is now the Vue component, and it even specifies that it's doing it with Vue 3 and the composition API because Vue 2 had a slightly different syntax, which is nice because this is more similar to the React component we just did. And let me pull these up like side by side. Let me show you. So if we look at the original component, we have things like the blockchain data. That's like the state. And in the React component, you have that state, and then you're going to show it down here. And it's the same thing with this component. You have your blockchain data state. So the syntax is different, but the component is doing the same thing in the sense that it has a button. You click the button, and then it displays data for the dash domain. You pass it. So then I just did that with like every other framework, and it basically spits them out like one after the other.
Yep. And the specific data that you're getting here is very basic. It's just your hello world of Dash platform, right? Can you scroll to where that business logic is of getting the Dash blockchain data?
Yeah, so let me pull up the project itself. So we have here an API, which is an Express server, and we're importing a Dash client. So this is where we're connecting with so we do testnet and then a mnemonic. And so I have these in like environment variables, but this just has cloned down a new project, so there's none yet.
So you're using the Dash SDK, which is the culmination of all the work that Dash core group has done on Dash platform. The Dash SDK is what wraps all of that together in one simple library.
Yep. And then we export the client, import the client here. And now this is what calls the whatever name you pass it, and then it adds the dash domain and then resolves it so you can get that data back.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So you wrote this in React, and then how many different frameworks did you have ChatGPT help you convert this into?
Yeah, and actually, just to clarify, so this is the Express server that returns it, and then in React here, this is the component that then fetches from that server running on localhost. So the Express server is just you create it once, and then you have this API that is going to give you back the data. So partly, this particular example worked really well because the front and the back end are totally decoupled, and that's going to be the case for the most part when we do this stuff. So let's see, how many do we have here? We have
just so everybody knows, you can actually use this SDK on the browser as well without using an Express server or any server for that matter. I don't know if that's how you set this up. Are all of these front-end clients contacting the Express server, or?
So you only want to call from the client if you're not going to be passing it any important wallet information. And then I tried that. I hit a bug. I'm not sure if that was via the library, but that's going to be like one of the first things I'm going to do once I finish these example apps is start doing other places for the Dash SDK, either like a serverless function or running on the browser or like an edge function.
Right. So your intuition was that, hey, this 12-word seed phrase is something that's very private. Therefore, I need to have my own server to have the Dash mnemonic, as it's also called, in an environment variable. But a different project that the incubator is working on is bringing a wallet into the browser that's encrypted and everything, where you could have potentially that be your secure storage for your Dash seed phrase.
Okay, that's super sweet. Yeah, I didn't know that.
So cool.
Your question was how many of these did I do? So I did, let's go back to this one. So I did Vue, then Svelte, and then SolidJS, and then just vanilla JavaScript. So this is interesting now. So then I asked for Quick. This is the first one that says this is too new. This is a problem if you try and work with really cutting edge libraries, that it only is trained up to September 2021. Mm-hmm. So there's ways to get around that. If you feed it some code from Quick, you could get it to figure it out. But I just kind of skipped it for now. And then Angular, and then Preact. And all of these, by the way, every single one of these, you copy and paste it, and it works. Like it didn't give you kind of the component with like some bugs you had to fix. It just gave you the entire working code. Mm-hmm. And then lit HTML, and then Alpine. So it's like 8, I think.
And how long did this take you, roughly?
The time it takes for ChatGPT to export the answer, basically, like, because you just copy paste the code from React and say rewrite this. And actually, I think I just said it each time. You should say rewrite it again in Svelte.
Yeah.
Rewrite it again in SolidJS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rewrite it. That's all you do, and then you wait like 30 seconds for it to do this. So this would have all taken like 5 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
So you wrote the original code, yep. Anthony, and then you used this tool to translate it to as many other programming languages as you were looking for.
Yeah, right. Which is the thing I could have done on my own. I know most of these frameworks, but it would have taken longer because I'm not as fast in Vue as I am in React. And then there's like context switching, and okay, how do I fit these specific parts of the component to these specific parts of this other framework? So yeah, it's an incredible time saver.
Nice.
And so other than translating one programming language to another, which you've shown us here, have you found that at least in your Dash work that the tool is useful for anything else? Like ChatGPT, make this Dash program do XYZ or whatever, like something from scratch where you didn't ask it to translate?
Yeah, so I have also used it for debugging. So this is an example of where I had and this is an Angular bug, but basically you just say what you did and like that you're getting an error, and you give it the error. Sometimes you want to give it some code too, so it has like context. But a lot of times it'll say, like, so it says this error message is from the Angular router saying you have a route configuration which doesn't have one of these. And it kind of explains those concepts. So that's pretty cool. In terms of generating things from scratch, yes, that's not what I've done yet, just because I had like all these frameworks to kind of build out. But the great thing about ChatGPT is that whatever you can think of, you can try, and you'll get an immediate response whether it like works or not. So you can try, just like start asking it questions. Actually, I don't want to open my sidebar. It shows all your chat history, so I'm going to stop sharing real quick.
Maybe we can pull up
Halawe's comment again. Yeah. He says, I've used ChatGPT 4 to comment my modern Fortran code and verify that I'm doing things efficiently. It's extremely powerful and has increased my productivity, but you have to verify the responses.
Modern Fortran code? Is that a joke? I'm not sure if he's being serious there.
Well, if it is, I didn't get it.
I mean, maybe there is modern Fortran code. Anyway, I have a question about what Amanda was talking about as well. I would love to be able to integrate ChatGPT in our documentation site at some point, where a new user from Dash comes into Dash, and instead of like browsing the documentation just line by line and subject by subject, category by category, and trying to find out what he's looking for, you just have that prompt message in the documentation and it's embedded rather than going to like the ChatGPT site. Is that possible right now? And what would we have to do to our documentation site to get something like that? Because I know that I think it's Svelte or one of these.
So I was just about to pull this up. So there's a couple that are doing it. One that I think is pretty good right now and worth checking out is Houston. So Houston is the Astro one, and they got this set up back like January, so it's already been around for a while.
Astro. That's right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Sorry, what are Astro docs? What's that?
Yeah, so Astro is a front-end JavaScript framework that lets you build with a lot of, so it lets you use all the different frameworks. Like, so I was showing you how I did all those things in those different frameworks. Astro is a way to build a site, and you can use kind of any of those, but it's also very content focused. So you get really fast static builds and stuff. It's just a super sweet tool, and they have pretty good docs too.
And this is part of their docs, houston.astro.build. So what is Astro and why is it great? Yeah, I would love to have something like this on the Dash site to like, you could just say, hey, how do I set up a Dash server to listen for transactions? And then instead of manually going through the documentation, it just kind of tells you how to navigate the docs, because our docs are huge.
Interesting. So this gives pretty good answer here. There's something weird going on in the resources here. So I'd say don't try and get too fancy with it, would be my advice when you're doing this with Dash. Let's say a React component with a counter. Let's see what it does with that. I've never actually used this. I just have known they've had this. Yeah. So I'm not sure if this tag is in the place now where you can just plug it into someone's docs and actually like get it to work the way you want it to work. I would say you're going to be able to do it if you're willing to put a lot of time into figuring out how to work with OpenAI's API specifically, but I wouldn't like try and use a plugin or something, because you just don't know. Like, this is like ChatGPT can handle this with no problem. So there's like, this is why I say there's not all language models are created equally, you know?
Right. But are there any generalized tools where you can feed it your own, like feed it the documentation, our docs?
Yeah. So
and it kind of digests them and helps people get answers.
Yeah. So there's the thing you got to do, you got to think about first is that you can't just feed like questions about Dash docs to ChatGPT, because it wasn't necessarily trained on the Dash docs. So what you need to do is you need to use what are called embeddings. So embeddings are how you basically take a big chunk of text and then feed it to an already trained model to say, hey, I want to give you some new, it's like in the Matrix, so like they plug Neo in, like download a bunch of knowledge into their brain. This is how you would download Dash's knowledge into it. You create some embeddings, and then you could ask it questions through your normal kind of like chat type stuff.
And do they keep that data? Like, I guess the servers that make up ChatGPT, if you feed it the Dash docs in order to execute on your particular goal, do they keep those Dash docs or do they kick them?
So the stuff has kind of been in flux recently. I want to say, I think that now they delete data after a certain amount of time. If that stuff does particularly bother you, there are ways to do this without using OpenAI. So
no, it would bother me if they kicked them.
Oh, they kicked them. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I mean, if you want the stuff to be open, like that's why I would say, like, don't feed ChatGPT like your credit card. But I would say, like, for the most part, if you're doing kind of fairly not ridiculous things, then it should be good. But yeah, so you basically do the embeddings, which I have not done, so I can't really speak too much about that.
Maybe
and then
too
you
early to even try.
Actually feed it. But I was going to show you Hugging Face, which is here you can actually run like open source models. But let's see if you want to do. So this would have been GPT-2 way back in the day. So this is an open source version of one of an older models of ChatGPT, or the thing that became ChatGPT.
CMDR Skull Crush says open source LLM LangChain is able to digest a knowledge base, become an expert within that domain, and build a chatbot on top. No OpenAI proprietary code necessary.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yes and no. LangChain can do it without OpenAI, but you want to use the OpenAI plugin with LangChain to do that, because then it would be better. But I agree, LangChain is super cool. That's a good call out. It works with a lot of other non-OpenAI APIs, but you kind of have to test those out each individually and see how good they are.
Well, I love this idea of
here you go.
language learning models, but I wish that Dash could kind of help the open source competitors in this field, so that we have, you know, a viable open source alternative to the big box.
To the big box. Are you talking about ChatGPT?
I mean, the big companies.
Well, here's the problem: is that right now it's economically infeasible for anyone but a company with billions of dollars to have created this model in the first place. Like, it cost many, many, many millions of dollars just to train the model to where it is now, let alone continuing to run it. So this is actually, there's something I wanted to say, but I forgot, is that when you were asking about open source, so no matter what, in some amount of years, an open source model will be out that is good and then better than GPT-4. It might be a year, it might be 5 years. It's kind of hard to say at this point, but eventually we'll get there. It's hard.
Well, only if we focus on it, though, right? Like,
people are. Trust me, there's a lot of open source work happening on this. Don't worry.
Yeah, the open source community has to make it happen, because they won't it won't just happen on its own. Open source will catch up and surpass closed source in AI. The article "Google has no moat" illustrates that very well. Well, that's encouraging. I hope that happens. I just know that open source has struggled against the very focused corporations that have VC and ultimately government backing as far as their funding goes. So it's a big rabbit hole that I won't go into in this episode, but I would love to have Dash be part of the solution with open source funding in general. And we need a lot of changes for that to happen, but
I mean, there's lots of interesting ideas about integrating blockchain and AI stuff, because the models themselves are really, like, people are paying for a lot of compute and things like that. So if you had some sort of, like, you've heard of Numerai?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's like a stock market betting app, or like not betting, maybe it is betting. You have a coin and it's hooked up to like AI and just a market, and so it's all together.
I think personally, I think that the only place that blockchain and cryptocurrency could help AI is in funding. Like blockchains and cryptocurrency, blockchains in general, it's one of the most least efficient computing platforms there is because you have to do multiple things on multiple servers. It's built for security and robustness, not for efficiency. So we're never going to, I don't know. I won't go into the details about my opinions on this because I'm not an expert, but I think that we could really help with the funding model. And that's, again, that rabbit hole that I won't go into. But any, before Amanda really closes this out, do you have anything that you wanted to tell us, Anthony, about your journey with OpenAI and that we haven't already discussed today? Because I know that you know a lot, and we've only been 40 minutes in here. But
yeah, I mean, like, so
well, also, Anthony, do you have any specific recommendations for any developers who want to save time and effort the way you are?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, so this is the advice I've been kind of giving people is you should start by just identifying some sort of repetitive task you have within your every workday. You know, it can be scheduling a meeting, it could be writing an email, it could be doing some, and just like try and think of like, okay, can I have ChatGPT do that for me or do most of it for me? And then just kind of start like integrate like one or two things into your workflow. So for me, what I do with that is I have a newsletter I write every week. And so I'll pick like a really like in-depth, like kind of update for like a blog, like an open source project, like Astro 2.6 coming out, you know, and I literally just take the entire article, plug it into ChatGPT and say, write me a 1-paragraph summary or a 2-paragraph summary, or however long you want it to be. And it just takes the whole thing and like condenses it down to like the exact summary I would have wanted to write myself if I'd had the time to read through every single line, perfectly condense it down the way I wanted to. So that's pretty great. And you don't have the hallucination problems. It's not going out and finding data in its brain. It's just taking something, you give it, and it condenses it down. So it's not adding anything. So that's where you don't get the hallucination problem, which is like really great because you still should check the output, but you don't have to like be as worried that the output's going to be totally crazy and ridiculous and incorrect. And then I also use it to like fix bugs in my code, but also like just ask it weird philosophical questions, like, or ask it to analyze a piece of art, or ask it to write a poem about something in a style of something. Like I do all sorts of just weird stuff with it just to see what it does. And it's like really fascinating actually sometimes what it does.
Okay. Well, right on. I will say thank you for sharing that with us today, Anthony. And I know that there were other places that were calling your attention today, and you chose to join us instead. So extra special thanks for that.
This is way better than a meeting.
Well, I wasn't going to come out and say Anthony skipped a meeting, but Anthony skipped a meeting. Maybe send ChatGPT in your place next time. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.